We find ourselves in London in the early 2000s, in a city that, especially back then, was a place of longing for young, creative, up-and-coming artists. At that time, people from all over the UK were drawn to the capital, driven by the big dream of realizing their full potential. Among them is a young actor. He is set to play the lead role in a play called The Accidental Death of an Anarchist. In this play, his character falls from a fourth-floor window and dies. But this big performance will never happen. Before the premiere can be celebrated, the lead actor dies. He falls several meters from a balcony, just like his character in the play. But can this eerie coincidence really be an accident? Mark is 30 years old. He studied philosophy at Trinity College in Cambridge. He's done a lot already. He's worked as an antiquarian bookseller and a computer programmer, and he's spent a lot of time studying mathematics. He taught himself 5 foreign languages. Now, however, he wants to fulfill his greatest wish in London. Mark Blanco dreams of becoming an actor. On December 2, 2006, Mark goes out with some friends. First, the group goes out for a bite to eat in the Wapping neighborhood. Afterward, they visit a pub called the George Tavern. Mark has a few flyers with him for the play he'll soon be performing in. He proudly shows them around and tries to hand them out to people. They were at rehearsal earlier that evening. Mark landed the lead role. He plays the character of the maniac, who dies after falling from the 4th floor of a building. As Mark Blanco roams through London's nightlife after rehearsal on this Saturday evening, he is enthusiastic. He can hardly wait to take the stage for the play. But Mark Blanco will never be able to play the maniac, because just a few hours later, he himself will fall from a building. And even today, people still ask themselves the very questions that the play revolves around. Did Mark fall from the building, or did someone push him to his death? London literary agent Paul Rouncil is hosting a small party this evening. The artist's apartment is located on Rampart Street in the Whitechapel neighborhood. People are constantly coming and going from Paul's apartment to make music together, write, or use drugs. Mark is an acquaintance of Paul Rouncil and has been to his place a few times before. After his visit to the pub, he goes there again on December 2nd. He shows up at the Whitechapel apartment around 11:45 p.m. with a bottle of wine in hand. On the evening of December 2nd, 2006, 7 people are present. Mark Blanco, the host, Paul Rouncil, rock musician Pete Doherty and his bodyguard Johnny Headlock, designer Annabelle Hellsmith, Naomi Stirk, and Kate Russell Pevier. Mark had already had a few drinks at the pub and is now eager to tell everyone about his upcoming theater performance. Mark hopes he might even be able to invite the famous rock musician Pete Doherty to his show. At the time, Pete is one of the most famous and influential musicians in the UK. He is very successful both with his band The Libertines and with his side project Baby Shambles. For someone like Mark, hanging out with someone like Pete is probably very exciting. And if Pete Doherty were to come to his theater performance, it would certainly be good publicity within the London art and music scene. In his enthusiasm, however, Mark comes across as pushy from Pete's perspective. So pushy, in fact, that an argument breaks out between the two men. Mark is also said to have confronted Pete harshly. Several party guests later testify that there was a situation in which Mark shoved Pete with full force against the fireplace. Pete's bodyguard Johnny and host Paul then intervene. Paul later admits that he very forcefully asked Mark to leave the apartment. He also admits that he punched Mark in the face 3 times. Paul steals Mark's hat. He sets it on fire and lets it burn out in an ashtray lying nearby, possibly to teach him a lesson. Eventually, Paul and Johnny escort Mark out of the apartment together and take him outside. At this point, it is 12:25 a.m. Party guest Annabelle claims that Pete also went to the door to send Mark away, but only 3 of the 4 men returned. The 4th of them had just fallen several meters to his death. Years later, in 2023, Pete Doherty is asked about that night of partying in an interview. He too admits that the argument between him and Mark actually took place. The atmosphere between the two had been strange, and there was a confrontation with Mark Blanco. Using footage from nearby surveillance cameras, it is possible to roughly reconstruct the events of that night. At 12:25 a.m., Mark leaves the building where Paul's apartment is located. Earlier, Paul, Johnny, and possibly Pete had kicked Mark out. But just a short time later, at 12:27 a.m., he goes back inside. Only 56 seconds after Mark returns, he falls over a balcony railing and lands on the sidewalk below. He falls 9 meters and is seriously injured. The balcony is located next to the stairwell. He fell from there and sustained severe head injuries. Annabelle Smith says that they found Mark on the street below at 12:39 a.m. She had gone outside and found her friend dying on the sidewalk. Annabelle states that she then ran back upstairs to tell Naomi, and the 2 of them subsequently called an ambulance. This account is consistent with a later statement from one of Paul's neighbors. It wasn't until 12:43 a.m. that an emergency call was received by the British police. That is a full 14 minutes after Mark fell from the balcony. Before the emergency doctor arrives at 12:57 a.m., Pete, Johnny, and Kate are seen running away at 12:50 a.m., past the dying Mark Blanco. Pete stops for just a moment and appears to pick something up off the ground. In the same 2023 interview, Pete Doherty also explains why he didn't wait for the police and ambulance to arrive. He says he wanted to avoid another run-in with the police at the time. After all, in the 2000s, he was regularly arrested for drug offenses anyway. And he had drugs on him that evening too. He says, "I probably didn't take the situation seriously enough at the time. Maybe I should have just stood my ground, taken a deep breath, and had the guts to flush everything down the toilet and be there when the police arrived. But I didn't want to see the police. I didn't want to. It was a damn inconvenience for me. And it's terrible to say something like that because he was lying dead on the street, and I was more worried about getting arrested for drug possession." Mark Blanco is taken to the hospital with severe head injuries. On the morning of December 3rd, his family is told that he will not survive his severe brain injuries. Mark Blanco ultimately dies on December 4th at the age of just 30. Incidentally, the incident at Paul Roundhill's apartment is not the only one from which Pete flees that night. At 2:25 a.m., hotel staff call the police. Pete had disrupted a private wedding reception there, set off the fire alarm, started a brawl in the hotel bar, and trashed his hotel room. By the time the police arrive at the hotel, however, he's already long gone. Mark had been really looking forward to his play and was highly motivated right up until his sudden death. Mark's mother, Sheila Blanco, visits the scene herself on December 4th. The police are also present. As she walks up the stairwell to the apartment, She sees something red on the floor on the landing right in front of the apartment door. It looks like dried blood. She points it out to one of the police officers present, but he waves it off. This strikes Sheila as odd because the balcony from which Mark fell was not attached to Paul's apartment, but to the stairwell. In her view, a bloodstain directly in front of the spot where he fell should actually be an important piece of evidence. As Sheila leaves the apartment building again, she notices something else on the sidewalk in front of the door: a fallen eyeglass lens. As it turns out later, it actually belongs to Mark Blanco's glasses. The police apparently didn't notice the lens during their initial inspection of the scene. Sheila wants to give the lens to a police officer, but he tells her to just keep it as a memento. On December 2nd, Mark is wearing an 800-pound Heuer watch. When he is admitted to the hospital, however, it is missing, as are his antique cufflinks. Sheila tries to stay as up-to-date as possible on the investigation, but not much seems to be happening on the police's part anyway. Even a week after Mark's death, not all 6 party guests had been interviewed. The lead investigator has already reached a conclusion. He says he is 98% certain that Mark Blanco took his own life. The lead investigator says he has seen the surveillance footage showing Mark's fall. He is absolutely certain that he jumped. A friend of Mark's also returns to the scene of the incident. The building superintendent tells her that there is indeed a surveillance video, but so far, no one has come to view it. If that's true, the investigator lied. Nevertheless, the public unanimously assumes that Mark took his own life. The party host shares this view as well. Paul Roundhill says at the time that he believes Mark did it as a kind of art form, also in relation to his play. On December 24, 2006, 3 weeks after Mark's death, there is a major turning point. Johnny Headlock turns himself in at the Bethnal Green police station and confesses to killing Mark Blanco. He is even said to have bragged about it to others. On top of that, Johnny has a criminal record for acts of physical violence. However, Johnny Headlock changed his statement after just a few hours in police custody. He later claimed he had been high when he turned himself into the police. He said he hadn't pushed Mark off the balcony and hadn't touched him at all. And after Johnny withdrew his confession, he was released by the police. To this day, this remains incomprehensible to many, especially to Mark's mother, Sheila. Because she felt the police weren't doing enough, Mark's mother, Sheila Blanco, took it upon herself to conduct further investigations. In 2010, she submitted the findings she had gathered with the help of private investigators and independent experts to the British police. As a result, the case was reopened. A renowned neurobiologist reevaluated Mark Blanco's injuries. He believes that Mark's head injury is inconsistent with a deliberate jump. Other investigators note, however, that no one can prove that another person was on the balcony with Mark Blanco. It is therefore impossible to say whether there was even a possibility that Mark was pushed by someone. In 2011, Johnny Headlock is arrested again, as are rock musician Pete Doherty and party host Paul Roundhill. All 3 are suspected of involvement in the murder of Mark Blanco. Johnny, Pete, and Paul are questioned at length, but are once again released by the police. All 3 claim to have had nothing to do with Mark Blanco's death. Years later, Johnny Headlock does end up in court after all. One of the party guests from the night of Mark's death, Naomi Stuck, filed a complaint against him for stalking. Johnny allegedly kept showing up uninvited at her home and bombarded her with text messages, some of which were threatening. Naomi obtained a restraining order against Johnny. There were no further legal consequences for him. This was justified by his mental and physical health condition. This is because Johnny Headlock suffered a stroke shortly after Mark Blanco's death. Over the next few years, more and more details about the case came to light. Witnesses independently reported hearing loud shouts and curses shortly before Mark fell. A neighbor later described the incident as follows: "We heard a violent struggle. Paul was screaming, and there was a lot of cursing. There was a scream, and the man landed on the ground. 2 girls went out onto the street and tried to revive him. They called out to Paul to call an ambulance. Paul threw down a few tissues and shouted, 'Sorry, Mark, sorry, Mark.' But the most important piece of evidence is likely the surveillance camera footage. The resolution is poor, but the images do at least offer a few clues. Sheila Blanco later hires a specialist to analyze the video. To him, it looks as though Mark's body was lifeless during the fall. There are no defensive movements or attempts to break his fall. He concludes that it is quite possible Mark was unconscious during his fall. As we know from Paul Roundhill's own statement, there was indeed a physical altercation during which Mark was struck in the face. We just don't know whether Paul struck Mark before he left the apartment the first time or after he returned. From the footage, we also know that only 56 seconds elapsed between Mark's return to the house and the fall. Theoretically, however, that could have been enough time to knock Mark unconscious. It is important to note that this is purely speculative. A second opinion is sought. Grant Fredericks is a renowned US CCTV analyst. He also believes that Mark Blanco's death is at least suspicious. He uses a special video technique to analyze the surveillance footage and reconstruct Mark Blanco's fall. And in doing so, he arrives at a rather disturbing conclusion. Another arm can be seen in the video just before Mark's body falls. It looks as though at least one other person was involved. According to Fredericks, Mark was thrown off the balcony. He was murdered. Incidentally, Mark Blanco isn't the first person to have died in Paul Roundhill's apartment. On August 10, 2001, Paul Caniff was visiting the apartment in Whitechapel. At some point during the night, he climbed onto the roof of the building and fell from there into the courtyard, dying from severe head injuries. The police found drugs in his pants pocket. As a result, the incident was classified as an accident. A friend of Caniff's, Terrence DeBurka, is very skeptical. The circumstances surrounding his friend's death struck him as odd, even back in 2001, and Paul Roundhill seems suspicious to him. Because Terrence himself has a friend who is a police officer, he asks him to look into it internally. And this friend is said to have told Terrence that Paul was a possible police informant. In response to later media inquiries, the Metropolitan Police neither confirmed nor denied this allegation. Paul, however, denies ever having passed information on to the police. Paul Caniff's family feels that Caniff's tragic death is being used to further sensationalize the story surrounding Mark Blanco. Ultimately, we do not know if there is any truth to the rumor that Paul Roundhill was once a police informant, nor do we know if this might have anything to do with Paul Caniff's death. And unfortunately, we also do not know what happened to Mark Blanco. What is certain, however, is that they have not given up to this day and are still trying to find out why Mark had to die in December 2006. In late 2023, the Metropolitan Police confirmed that the investigation into Mark Blanco's death is still ongoing. To this day, Sheila Blanco appears on various TV shows and tries to push the investigation forward. Over the years, she has invested more than £60,000 of her own money to investigate her son's case. There is still no clear resolution to this day. She focuses primarily on musician Pete Doherty. Sheila Blanco wants answers from him as well, just as she does from the other party guests. In a 2023 interview, Pete says, "You can't blame her for that. Her son fell to his death, and some people really believe he was thrown to his death. And then I stand in front of the camera and run away. I've never met Sheila Blanco, but I can understand her anger. I think her anger toward me is misplaced, although the circumstances were also shady and shitty. By the way, 4 months after Mark's death, Pete returned once more to Paul Roundhill's apartment. There, he recorded a music video for his new single. It was called The Lost Art of Murder. That brings us to the end of today's video. Sadly, at the end of this video, I can now ask you the very question that was the central theme of Mark's upcoming play. Do you think Mark Blanco fell out of the window and that his death was therefore a tragic accident? Or do you think that one or more of the party guests are responsible for his death? I'm looking forward to reading your theories and opinions in the comments. Other than that, there isn't much more to say. Thank you for watching and for all your support, and I hope you have a good morning, afternoon, or evening. I hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, bye everyone.